Welcome back to another edition of Real Spiritual Talk Radio. I'm your host, Lamont Gates, once again bringing you the world of faith, metaphysicality, and spirituality. Today, my guest had a near-death experience that provided her with an eternal amount of unconditional love. Joining me today, ladies and gentlemen, is near-death experiencer Wendy Harrington. Wendy, welcome to Real Spiritual Talk Radio.
Oh, thank you, Lamont. It's lovely to be here with you.
Glad to have you on indeed. Now, Wendy, before we get into your near-death experience account and what triggered it, I typically like to go backwards with my guests and ask about any previous or prior religious and or spiritual belief systems they may have held, if applicable. What about it? Did you have any specific religious beliefs that you held prior to having your near-death experience?
No, I didn't really. I was raised in a Church of England school and so went to church as part of the school, but my parents weren't religious. And for me, yeah, I kind of figured we're born, we die, we're dust. Like that's it.
So you had absolutely no concept of an afterlife or an idea that if someone died, perhaps there's something that moves forward other than this earthly life.
No, yeah, I didn't really think there was anything else.
Quite fascinating. So with that said, why don't we go into what it was that actually triggered your near-death experience? Because I'm assuming afterwards you've come out of this a lot different than you were prior to having the near-death experience.
Yeah, definitely. So I was expecting a baby. There was about 8 weeks to go, and when I became ill and got taken into the hospital, and then the baby was her heartbeat went down, and so they said they needed to do an emergency cesarean to deliver her, which they did. And so I was medically sedated while that happened, and then came round. The baby had been born, and thankfully she was fine, and she was in the special care unit. And over the next sort of 5 days, my health was just deteriorating. I'd never had a major operation before, so I put it down to having had the cesarean section, but it just got worse and worse. And then on about the fifth day after she was born, I was rushed over to the intensive care unit where it was diagnosed that I had necrotizing fasciitis, which is more commonly known as the flesh-eating disease. It had got into the cesarean section wound and then was sort of spreading. It's horrendous. It moves so fast. Apparently, you can actually see it spreading. It's like black spreading over the skin. And so it was spreading, all up the sides of my body. And so the surgeons had to just physically remove the flesh. That's all they can do. There's no treatment for it. So they sort of draw a line around the edge of the black, remove the flesh, and then hope they've got it all. So in an attempt to save my life, they removed my womb, ovaries, and about 2/3 of the flesh on the front of my torso, before then putting me into a medical coma.
So this was a very serious condition that you had, and I'm assuming you probably didn't think it would get this far.
No, and I don't remember it, but my husband said that I said to him just before, "Am I going to make it?" I don't actually remember that, but I do, because I remember initially I thought I had meningitis because I think it was like the worst thing I could think of. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I just had a lot of, abdominal pain, and yeah, then obviously was concerned as to whether I would make it, but I was in such a fog by then, I don't actually remember that.
So why don't you take us into the time when you were going through from the operation into the medically induced coma and into an otherworldly realm? How did that begin?
Yeah, so the very first thing was I was aware of myself and I knew I wasn't in my body. And it was so clear, and I'm sure you know it too, and your listeners, like that. Just think, do you know a moment where you feel like you feel the same? I always say, like, whether you're 5, 15, 25, however old you get, there's a little part of us, isn't there, which feels unchanged, like that sort of sense of self. And I was aware of that. And because I'd been aware of it before, and I didn't know, I just knew I wasn't in my body. It was really clear. I remember thinking like, oh, well, I'm not my body. I must be something else. That was like a sort of brief moment. And then I was just, there was a momentum into this incredible light. and it was this forward momentum, and there was just light all around. And the main thing I remember most, though, is the feeling, like, oh, the bliss, the peace, the serenity. Words would never do it justice. It was just profound, and I was quite happily going. I had no thought for this physical world. I was just quite happily going, and happy to just go, go, go. And then all of a sudden I came to an abrupt halt, and I looked back. It was like my arm. I looked back, and it was my husband. And so I tried to pull him, but he wouldn't budge. And I could see forms taking shape ahead of me. And I just heard telepathically, if you come, you must come on your own. And I really wanted to go, and I really wanted him to come with me. And I tried to pull him again, and he wouldn't budge. And I just heard the same telepathically again, if you come, you must come on your own. And I didn't want to leave him. And then with that thought, that momentum subsided, and I came back into my body.
Now, this is a very interesting account here, because it sounds like not only were you moving forward in this otherworldly realm, but as you said, you were attempting to bring someone with you, and which happened to be your husband. Now, when you woke up from this, did you tell your husband immediately about it, or did you tell anyone about this?
Yeah, I did. So I told my mum and my husband, and what they told me was they had virtually held my hand, like physically holding my hand, almost the whole time that I was in the medical coma. And one of them would be there holding my hand, and I think, wow, like if they weren't holding my hand, like would I have gone? And my mum said she used to massage my hands, because they put my arms were in slings, because I also had septicemia, so they were trying to keep the blood flow at my vital organs. So my mum used to massage my hands and things like that, and my husband holding my hand, and yeah, it does make me wonder if that physical aspect had been there, if that hadn't been there, would I have continued? I don't know.
Now, you said going into this experience, you had a crystal clear, almost like consciousness. Was your consciousness heightened, would you say, versus your consciousness right now, sitting in the chair?
Yeah, God, that's a brilliant question. It it was just very focused, like completely on that moment. Like there was nothing else apart from that. And because I can tell you, there was no thought for this physical world. There was just this overwhelming peace and serenity, and almost like an emptiness. Um, yeah, just absolute peace. No one's ever asked me that before. That is such a good question. Yeah, it was just this complete peace, because I remember my father saying to me afterwards, "Oh, well, you must have known, that you must have known that you just had the baby." But I can honestly say there was no thought for the baby. There was no thought for my other children. There was no thought even for my husband until he was on the end of my arm, and I, that the whole momentum, it was just this momentum, this movement forwards in this incredible light, in this incredible peace that was so welcoming. It was just like, oh yes, I'll go here, this is lovely.
So it was kind of like that otherworldly place's version of a gravitational pull or push into this light, would you say?
Yeah, 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 there was a definite, yeah, it was like a pull, like a pulling in. Mm.
Now, going into this light, you did talk about unconditional love, which is very common in most near-death experiences when they enter the light. How could you compare this love to the feeling of love that you've ever felt here on planet Earth? Probably incomparable, right?
Yeah, completely incomparable. And I think before that I thought I knew what love was, and what it really made me realize was I didn't know what love was at all. I think, commonly as humans, it's a love of conditions. We don't mean to do it like that, but that's what happens. And yeah, because I met it afterwards as well. I met it some years afterwards, where I was questioning the near-death experience. So obviously I lived, came back and got met with a whole load of trauma. And, that wasn't easy. That wasn't an easy ride. And then I was just studying, because it made me so curious about, well, who are we then? And like, what is this? And what else is there? And part of my study, I was studying psychology and doing a degree in psychology. And one of the theories is our near-death experience is just something that the brain does at that point in time. And I thought, well, maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't something more than that, because obviously I was in hospital. I was on a cocktail of drugs. There was a lot of the toxins in my system. And I actually began to question it, even though it always had a very different quality to anything else. And I was also studying Eastern philosophies and, energy, Tai Chi, meditation, things like that. And I was doing a Tai Chi weekend retreat. We went to this beautiful place in nature. And it was the first time I'd ever been asked to be silent. And our instructor said, eat your lunch in silence, and then we'll do this exercise with a tree. And where I was, it's this beautiful place. So I live in the UK and I'm in the southwest. We have this lovely place called Dartmoor. So it's like lots of open, sort of very open land, big like rocks and rivers, and this really beautiful, quite a different kind of landscape. But the place where we were is like a very small area with stunted, twisted, gnarled oaks. So these like twisted trees, and they're small, and these huge boulders, and just like a copse of them. And so it has like this incredible magical quality anyway. And it was a beautiful sunny day. And so I was sitting on a rock eating my lunch, and my sister was with me. There was a group of, I suppose we were a group of about 20 of us or so. And first off, my sister and I were gesturing to each other. So even though my mouth was closed, I was not really being silent. I was having still having a kind of gestured conversation. And then we stopped that, and then I was sort of eating my lunch. And the first thing I realized was, my God, it's so noisy in here. There were just so many thoughts and internal dialogue and conversations going on. And through then eating my lunch, that sort of got quieter. And all of a sudden, the beauty of the place really struck me. And I realized, and it sounds silly to say it now, but at the time I had thought I was separate to nature. I thought humans were separate to nature. And there was this realization of, like, we're not separate at all. We are nature. We're part of it too. And I was sitting on this incredible, this big boulder with moss on it. And I remember thinking like, wow, this moss is amazing, because when I get up, it's just going to spring back up. But if I was to have the proportional weight on me, I would be squashed flat. And so this respect, this reverence for nature. And then we got up and I found this tree, and I just put my hands out by the tree, closed my eyes, and just gently began to move my hands backwards and forwards as whilst breathing. That was the exercise that we were requested to do. And all of a sudden, I lost all sense of my separate self again. I met the same that same kind of energy, and the words for it were unconditional love. And there was a knowing, I just knew everything comes from it and everything returns to it. And then in my mind, it kind of went like, peace and love, man. I thought about the hippies in the 60s, and I kind of went dunk back into my body. And it felt like, okay, look, you're going to question it. We'll just show you again, this is real, this exists. And it's invisible, it's intangible, but it's there, and we can all experience it.
Now, going back to your near-death experience, there was another element. You said that you had telepathic communication that spoke to you. Uh, was this voice, internal voice that is, was it masculine, feminine? How would you describe the voice?
Well, that's another brilliant question. I wouldn't have said it was masculine or feminine. And yeah, it was just the words, because I've also received a lot of poems, and sometimes like what I would call automatic writing, where it's just like taking dictation, and I'll hear it, but I'm hearing the words, but it doesn't really have a voice that is either masculine or feminine. Actually, it's just yeah, it's the words, but it's not I know it's not my own internal like wranglings, if you know what I mean, because it's so clear and crisp and precise. It's like dum 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 dum. It literally as if somebody was reading out something for you to write down. It has that kind of quality to it. But I wouldn't, and there were forms. That's what I remember. Is it wasn't like a one being. There it was these forms beginning to take shape. It was like it was like merge, you know, and they were beginning to solidify. And it almost felt actually if I'd got closer, they would have become more identified. But I didn't get close enough.
So it sounds like there were no tones, rather just a message.
Message, yeah, yeah.
It sounds like you also described a an after effect already after you had your near death experience by going to this tree and, realizing that you're one with nature and almost like popping out of your body again, almost in the form of an out of body experience. Now, many near death experiencers do talk about after effects. Some of them come back, they say, with higher empathy levels. They lack the fear of death. Some of them come back with premonitions, precognition, etc. Is there anything different about you since you've had your near death experience?
Yeah, all of those all of those things. Definitely like no fear of death. I wouldn't say I have no fear, because I think fear is that's been, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. That to me feels like the journey for all of us, this transformation from fear to love. And that was one of the first messages I received. So there has been the awareness of what love truly is. And yeah, no fear of death, because I'm like, wow, it's not the end. Like, you know, we are limitless beings. There's a real knowing of that. You know, we cease to have this current physical experience, but we certainly don't cease to be. And the possibility of the union and connection with that. So I was in hospital for 3 months, and then when I came home, I got woken up in the early hours. And I'd been so groggy before that. Must have been like 5 a.m. or something. And I was just wide awake with this one sentence, and it was just on repeat. And it just wouldn't stop. And in the end, I thought, I'm going to get up and write it down. And as I wrote the first sentence, the next one came and the next. And that was my first experience, I guess, like we'd say, of taking like automatic writing. And I wrote for ages. Sadly, I don't have the text anymore. I got lost. It was on a computer. But fundamentally, what it was saying was, it was all the ways that we as humans hurt ourselves. Like, you know, you hold on to blame and you hurt yourself, or you hold on to hate and you hurt yourself. And there was a piece where it said two things actually that I remember like crystal clear. One was, it said, there's love and fear and everything in between, and you can create from either. And it's really important to have a different experience that you choose love and you are unwittingly choosing fear. And the unwittingly that's really stuck with me, because it's like we don't mean to, but we are in this experience where we're creating from fear and we don't realize we're doing it. And then the other bit that floored me, because I'd been like, I was typing it out, and I remember every word. I was like, yes, that makes so much sense. Like, yes, that makes so much sense. Completely in agreement, until I wrote, everything is perfect in God's plan. And that completely, I stopped for a minute, because I didn't believe in God. I certainly didn't believe that there was a plan. But I kind of said, well, like every other word it's told me, like I believed. And so why would it be suddenly telling me something which wasn't true? So yeah, that was quite a phenomenal experience.
Yeah, and you stated that at the top of the interview that you did not believe in God. You didn't have a concept of the afterlife, or religion wasn't really a thing that your family bestowed upon you. What does the topic of religion and God look like now to you after having your near-death experience?
Yeah, it's been a slow, it's been a very slow journey for me. It took me a long time to even like say the word God. I had a lot of resistance to religion, and I still do, to be honest, because just the crusades and the wars and the death that has been done in the name of it, I'm like that is not unconditional love. The judgment, okay, it's this way or the highway. It's like, no, it isn't. It's like there's just love. And what I've dabbled in many religions, because I was looking for, I was looking for something initially. I wanted something that had that spiritual fuel for me, if you like. And it, it, I researched different things, and I think all of them, the core is love. I feel like the initial message is love, and then it gets distorted through our human filters. And I've met some beautiful people who are deeply religious, and I'm like, oh yeah, they are examples of unconditional love. And I've also met people who are deeply religious and are not examples of unconditional love. And so, yeah, I find it very interesting. And for me, there is this omnipresent, omnipotent, this incredible love, this unfathomable thing, which we could use the word God for. We equally in New Age, we'd say, source, wouldn't we? The universe. That's something. But I had the most incredible experience. My daughter's now, so my daughter was born at the time, she's 23 now. And when she was about 10, I was really struggling in my life. My husband, whose hand I had not wanted to die for, we'd broken up, and I was not in a good place. And I, was really struggling with rumination, and it's just self-hatred. That's what I really saw, like guilt and shame and self-hatred. And I didn't even, I didn't know that was there before, but I was really struggling with that. And there was an amazing lady in the community that I was in who was, several of my friends had gone to stay with her for this wonderful sort of healing session. And so I'd gone up to stay with her. So she's in Scotland, and my daughter was with my mother in Bristol, which is about a 6-hour drive, to give that some kind of distance, right? And I'd gone because I just reached this place of utter despair where I didn't know what to do with myself. I just felt so dreadful, felt like the worst person on the planet. And I'd actually, I woke in the night and I was in such pain and inner pain. I'd actually punched myself in the face. And I think, this poor body that has undergone such a lot, there was just I kind of understood self-harm in that moment a little bit, because I was like, oh, it's when it's like nothing's moving, and it's a deeply painful place. And yeah, in the end, I punched myself on the bone here, and that actually hurt, and that had released some tears, because I'm a real crier, but like that, I couldn't even cry. There was like nothing at that point. And what I always struggled with is I can't just go to anyone, because if it doesn't have the spiritual aspect for me, there was always something missing. But I went to stay with this amazing lady, and she was helping me see all these incredible things and amazing insights. But I reached this same point of utter pain when all of a sudden my daughter was in my mind telepathically, and she said, "You have to forgive yourself, mummy." And I said back telepathically, but I don't know how. And she said, "See yourself how I see you. See yourself with my eyes." And in that moment, oh, the love, it was the same. It was that pure, unconditional love. And my eldest daughter always hates it when I say this, but I said this was the statement that was in my mind, is I knew, wow, I could kill every single person on the planet and I would still be loved. Like, there is nothing so bad that any human being can do that they are not loved by that love of God, love of source. And it felt like, it was my daughter's love, but it was that pure love. She was a vessel, if you like, in that moment for it. And it was just like this cleansing, washing through. And I think that's what the world needs, is forgiveness. Like, I don't know if you know Course in Miracles, Lamont. I got drawn to A Course in Miracles because it was the first thing that actually made some sense from the experiences I was having. And in there, of course, it's all about forgiveness, that everything is, forgiveness is what will set us all free. And yeah, that was just an amazing experience of it that day. And when I got back to her, like, I think it was the next day, I got back to her and she ran up to me and she went, "All right?" And I went, "Yeah." And she said, "I came to you, mummy." She said, "I came to you because you needed me." And I was like, oh my gosh, you did. Yeah, it's just amazing.
And the central message in many near-death experiences is compassion, mercy, forgiveness, love, etc. That seems to be the central message that many near-death experiencers come back with. I know you stated that you mentioned your experience to your husband. Did you talk to anyone else about your near-death experience? And if so, how well received were you after telling your account to them?
Yeah, it's always been very well received, actually. So I spoke to, other family, friends, and I've spoken to quite a lot of people about it over the years. And it's always been very well received. It's interesting because my husband doesn't believe it. Like, he's just like, no, there's not something else. So that's interesting that my nearest and dearest doesn't really get it, but that's okay. I'm okay with that now. But most people are very interested by it. And I think many of us are wanting we're wanting something else, aren't we? Especially at, the times in the world right now where you could look out and say it's very challenging, isn't it, for many of us and in many places. And actually we need that seed of possibility, hope, light, to know that there is something else there. And if we can find our way to that place of forgiveness, like you said, what possibility, what can open up, when we find that. I just think that we, like this whole thing, like when we choose love and we really choose love, then there's a whole different experience possible for all of us.
And I say, whether someone believes your account or not, whether they believe there's a God or there's an afterlife, a spiritual realm, etc., they can't deny that, as you stated, what we do need right here is compassion and love.
Yeah. Yeah.
So at least if you can accept that, you're a step in the right direction,
Yeah.
regardless of your belief system.
Yeah. And I think that bringing it to yourself is so key. I think, I really didn't realize how much I hated myself. I was completely unaware of it. And I think that, often we're our worst enemies, aren't we? Our own mind is our worst enemy. So to bring that love and compassion to ourselves, um, yes, I think that begins to change a lot.
And the totality of the near death experience message is not just to love thy neighbor. It is, as you stated, to love yourself as well and to love the planet that you live on. Try to take care of that as best as you can as well.
Yeah.
Well, Wendy, very, very fascinating account you've presented to us here today. And I want to thank you for coming on Real Spiritual Talk Radio and sharing it with our audience.
Thank you. Thank you for, it's been lovely to connect with you, and thank you for your listening. Thank you so much.
No problem at all. Thank you once again, ladies and gentlemen, Wendy Harrington.
Thanks, Lamont.